Over the years, DBD has added nearly 300 perks to the game, and with these additions there's always discussion around what's going to be the next meta perk. Sometimes people get it right, but sometimes people get it very wrong. Today we're looking at those times. Hey everyone, and let's get into it. Boon Dark Theory is a perfect example of when people overestimate a perk's potential purely by its phrasing. When this perk was announced, it was almost immediately viewed as a problem, a perk which provided a 2% haste status effect to all those within the Boon's radius. Dark Theory released in the Sadako Rising chapter, so Boons had been around for only about a year at this point. They were still pretty new. However, in this new state they had already caused quite a few problems, namely Boon's Circle of Healing had essentially made up the meta of the past year, and had only recently been getting some considerable nerfs. Therefore people were cautious of boons, even if the threat of them had seemingly died down. It was still fresh on people's minds. The way Boon Dark Theory was received therefore was with a lot of bias, I think. An overestimation of the damage it could do due to the prior damage of Circle of Healing. I think it's interesting too because Dark Theory released before the made for this meta, and the whole discussion around its 3% bonus to movement speed. If a perk like Dark Theory released today with its 2% speed within boons, I think it'd likely have gotten a much more explosive reaction actually. I think haste is just one of those numbers people get nervous about. Shifting survivor move speed up even a percentage or 3 can make a world of difference, as we've seen. Oppression was a perk that people thought would be very powerful. It's not too hard to see why either. Back in late 2020 and with the A Binding of Kin chapter when this released, regression perks were less in number. The stronger picks were Hex Ruin or Pop Goes the Weasel. It was really between these two options. One was pretty risky, and the other one only affected one gen at a time. With Oppression you were able to kick one generator, but cause 3 others to also begin regressing, or send a difficult skill check if someone was working on them. Therefore Oppression, with its ability to technically pressure 4 gens at once, seemed really strong, even for the standards of the time. The only downside was the cooldown, sitting at a whopping 80 seconds. Weirdly though, this wasn't actually seen as much of an issue at the time. The perk was mostly accepted as likely being quite strong when it came to live. However, this is where we were wrong of course. It was in fact very weak and largely down to the cooldown. 80 seconds is a ridiculously long time to wait for a perk that realistically didn't do too much if survivors were even somewhat alert. An 80-second wait just didn't cut it. It was only until much later on in July of 2024 when the cooldown was halved and the perk became pretty usable. Completely overblown reaction though. Dragon's Grip is next up. Now, do you even know what this perk does? It's very rarely used nowadays, but on release it was assumed it was going to be very strong. This perk applies the exposed status onto a survivor who touches a recently kicked generator, also with an 80-second cooldown. I'm not sure what was going on back then in 2020 with the cooldown lengths. This is way too long though. The main reason this perk was assumed to be strong I think was purely down to it applying exposed. I understand this too, and I totally had the same reaction to this perk on the PTB. Generators used to work a bit differently back then. You could stop progression just by working on the generator quickly. Just a tap would stop it. Nowadays there's a little regression bar you need to reach. This made this perk sound a bit more deadly therefore, as people would often stay nearby generators when the killer came close, so they could quickly undo the regression as soon as the killer kicked it. This of course would make them exposed if the killer had Dragon's Grip. When this perk came to life though, it saw very little use. This was partly down to the huge cooldown just being way too punishing to simply use the perk, but the perk also suffered due to the bugs it had. It's had a number over the years. The core reason is just that this effect is realistically quite niche. It's only active for 30 seconds, and as it applies right after you've kicked the gen, it's really unlikely survivors go in and tap the gen that quickly. They'll usually at least wait for your terror radius to go before doing so, especially nowadays when you can't pause regression with a tap. A perfect example of a perk that sounds strong on paper, but really isn't in practice. Blood Rush was an interesting perk, and another case of sounding really strong on paper, like really strong, but realistically being so incredibly niche in application that it's sort of terrible. This perk allowed you to instantly recover from exhaustion at the cost of a health state that would regenerate back after 20 seconds, so long as you weren't hit. The idea was essentially that you'd use an exhaustion perk, the killer would chase you, wasting time, then you'd injure yourself, recover from the exhaustion, and use the exhaustion perk again, and then also heal if you outlasted the killer. It's a lot, I know. I think that's part of the issue with the original iteration of this perk, is that it's actually quite a few steps to be in a situation that works out like that, and for it to genuinely be useful, especially as a lot of killers are just going to drop you after you sprint burst away. They see you running away, they're like, okay, whatever. It's only going to be characters like Nurse who are actually going to chase you down, and surprise surprise, they can catch up even if you have 2 sprint bursts. However, on the Skull Merchant PTB, it was viewed as debatably the strongest of the Survivor perks across both of the siblings, and potentially as a real threat to the game's balance. Upon coming to life though, and nothing. The perk didn't even really appear on day one. It was a complete misjudgment by the community, with everyone quickly realizing this perk just required way too much setup, with the payoff being honestly quite risky still, and far from guaranteed. The perk was practically dead on launch. Even with its recent rework, it's still not really recovered. I think lots of people aren't even aware it's changed. It's actually not too bad now. Potential Energy was a funny case where people mistook the perk for being incredibly powerful, and I think mainly down to it being overly complex. It's a perk that has the longest description in the game after all. A lot of people got confused by it. I know, for example, lots of people thought the perk allowed you to do a gen whilst also building up potential energy stacks, releasing them into the same gen for double the gen progress. It didn't work this way, it never has. It works as sort of a generator progress storage. Activating the perk does this cool animation, and then you're able to store 20% of a generator's progress once you hit 20 stacks. However, it takes 1.5 charges of generator progress to get a single stack, which means you're losing about 10 seconds of time for each 20-second store. It's meant to be used so you can store up on one gen and move it to a gen that's in a riskier location to get a head start or a quick pop. This perk was assumed, even when understood properly, to actually be quite dangerous and a real possible contender to the ongoing 3-gen meta of the time though, with this perk releasing with Vittorio in Forged in Fog. On launch though, and with more time with the perk, not only did it cause more confusion, but it was also revealed as just plain bad, really. Losing time to store up the potential energy was rarely worth it, and there was the risk that if you got hit with your stacks, you'd lose them all, making it completely worthless. It's far too risky, and so rarely applicable in almost any situation, making it incredibly niche, and just kind of useless most of the time. Rapid Brutality was another haste-based perk that people were greatly concerned about at the time. It's a perk that gives you a 5% boost to movement speed for 10 seconds whenever you hit a survivor with a basic attack. The kicker though was that this perk disabled Bloodlust, the game's catch-up mechanic. Upon initial impressions, people thought this would actually be a great trade-off. Sure, there's no more bloodlust, but who needs it if you're going 5% quicker for 10 seconds? Bear in mind this was during the made for this meta, and so people already viewed percentage changes to haste as quite significant as a result. This really overblew the effects of this perk, I think, many saying it would counter made for this meaningfully, others saying it would be more powerful, and some rightly calling it out as barely useful compared to made for this, which was the case in the end. This perk really just fell flat on its face and was not much use at all against MFT, but the initial impressions were interesting. Invocation Weaving Spiders is another case of a perk that was seen as initially very threatening, and possibly even meta upon reading it. It's a perk that allowed you to reduce the progress required for all generators by 15 charges. To be able to activate it, you had to go down into the basement and do a summoning circle type of thing for 2 whole minutes. If people joined you though, it would become a lot shorter. This was initially viewed as quite strong, in writing especially. It was presumed as potentially another Boon situation that could have really disrupted the game. This was a new perk type entirely, after all. It also weirdly enough got nerfed from the PTB to live, losing 5 of the reduced charges. The live version only removed 10, so the devs clearly thought the perk was a little overtuned too, which is interesting. However, in live it's never been strong really. The perk is rarely used as is, even after its buffs post-launch. That's right, it went from getting nerfed from the PTB to being buffed quite considerably when live, showing the total switch up this perk had. It had its timer cut in half from 2 minutes to just 1 minute. Pretty balanced now, to be fair, but still not that great. It goes to show though just how much opinion can change. Dissolution released with the Dredge for Dead by Daylight's 6th anniversary in June 2022. This perk was slated to be very strong upon its reveal, a perk which would surely find its way into the top 10 easily for the killer side. This perk is simple: hit a survivor and for the next 20 seconds if they vault a pallet, it instantly breaks. This has never been changed either, and still on paper sounds really strong. It's definitely not bad either, and its pick rates have always been decently average since its release. This is definitely one of the more hot take picks for this list. However, when it was revealed, it was assumed it would be much stronger than it ended up being. This was primarily down to it being a perk that enabled you to break pallets remotely, essentially, and doing so after you damage someone, which is super straightforward. This perk was nowhere near as deadly as it was presumed, however, with there being clear counters and just lots of situations where it's just not that great. For example, there's a high chance when you hit a survivor, they're leaving a loop and getting away from any pallet they've just dropped. It just didn't make much sense in those situations. This one has less of a before and after contrast, I think, but regardless, it was definitely presumed to be much stronger on reveal than it truly ended up being. Hex Haunted Ground, interestingly, was slated to be a very strong perk upon its announcement in the Shattered Bloodline PTB. This perk is a trap hex which causes all survivors to become exposed for 60 seconds when one of its 2 totems are cleansed. It's another case where people see the word exposed and they panic. I think it was valid for the time though. Consider being back in 2018. The game is very different, perks are far fewer in number, and exposed as a status is like the worst one. That's the worst one. And this applies it for 60 seconds and to everyone. It does sound scary. Especially considering this is coming out back when Nurse was even stronger. It's sort of considered more of a fun niche perk nowadays, debatably sort of a meme one even. Rarely is it used in builds for purposes other than getting a quick and easy down. Survivors are generally more aware of hexes now though, and don't fall for cleansing them like they used to. A big saying back then was, if it glows, it goes. A saying which honestly you hear less and less nowadays, and it's often down to people simply being more comfortable with hexes, and teams generally taking care of them quite quickly. Even if a Haunted Ground does pop nowadays, it's usually no big deal. If a killer's lucky, they'll maybe get 1 down. It's sort of just not worth it a lot of the time. An interesting one though for perks that people thought would be very strong. Our final one today is Hyperfocus. This is last because it is debatable. There was argument over whether this was going to be the best thing ever or terrible. It's sort of just okay in reality. However, upon its announcement in PTB, there was a great concern over the perk and its usage. It's a perk that enables you to slowly ramp up your bonus gen progress from hitting great skill checks. At base, you get 1%, but then Hyperfocus ramps this percentage up in increments for each great skill check hit, up to 7 times. The downside being that the skill checks also appear faster each time, making it more difficult. This perk was going to be really strong according to a wide portion of the community, and partly down to its pairing with Stakeout, a perk which allows you to turn good skill checks into great ones. This allowed for easy hyperfocus stacks and caused great concern. It was one of those things that sounded really good in theory, and did sound like it could be busted, hitting 7 stacks of hyperfocus, which is the max, and repeatedly gaining nearly an extra 2% on great hits. This sentiment did last well into the perk's release too, unlike some of the others on this list. People did continue thinking the perk was really OP, even on launch. And there definitely were cases where it could be too, but not as game-breaking I think in reality as it was made out to be. It was also possibly down to it releasing alongside Wesker in the Project W chapter, Wesker having a very large terror radius, which fed Stakeout very efficiently. It's a decent perk for sure, but definitely not the game game-breaking monster it was presumed to be. Thanks for watching, let me know your thoughts and any perks you think I missed down below. Thanks, and goodbye.